And there was a lot of discussion with the drivers about whether they should come in for new rubber, and their opinion was yo-yoing around. Every time they were on the wet bit of the track, it was, I've definitely got to come in, I've definitely got to come in. And when they hit the dry part of the track, it was, no, this is way too dry. Were we able to see any evidence that the upgrades that we brought to Monaco had a positive impact? Well, I think that Monaco is definitely not the place you would like to bring a major upgrade to the track. You would like to make your debut at a more normal track, and that's what we planned. They'd been planned for Imola, but sadly with the cancellation of Imola, they arrived instead for their debut at Monaco. Not an easy thing, and I would say it's too early to say what their impact will be on the rest of the season, because Monaco is such a terribly difficult place to make these sort of judgments at. We didn't set the world on fire in qualifying, but the car had reasonably tidy race pace, and you know, we'll wait and find out at the next race to see where we truly stand at a more normal track. But the drivers seem to give reasonable feedback about the car. They felt good under braking, car felt okay, and the data that we took off the car on the aerodynamic sensors were not giving us any alarm bells. They were sort of suggesting that things were in line with expectation. Why did Lewis start on the medium tyre and why George on the hard? If any of you have followed this sport for a while and watched the ebb and flow of strategy, you'll have figured out that race strategy is very much like playing poker. You try to make decisions that give you your best odds, your best chances of success. Doesn't guarantee you success. You can have a brilliant hand and be unlucky and still lose, or you can have a terrible hand and be dead lucky and still have a great result. But overall, over the course of a season, then you improve your odds of having good outcomes. And given that Lewis and George started in very different positions on the grid, their hands that they had to play were correspondingly different. Lewis started relatively nearer to the front, which meant that he had, in a normal race, a good expectation of a good load of points, and therefore it didn't make sense for Lewis to take a high-risk strategy, because in normal circumstances he was going to get a good clutch of points, and if he took a high-risk strategy he might lose that clutch of points and get nothing, whereas his sort of options to improve are relatively small. George, on the other hand, starting further back, he didn't have so much to lose, but if everything played out beautifully for him on a hard, then he could actually catapult forward and get a good result. So given their respective starting positions, given their respective expectations at the beginning of the race, it made sense for Lewis to take the more conservative strategy that covered far more risks with the medium tyre, and George to take the slightly more optimistic strategy because he had less to lose. It's just the right thing for the right driver given their respective starting positions. Why was Lewis not able to do a second push lap in Q3? Simple answer, fuel. More complicated answer, because we felt that was the best opportunity for him to get his best possible lap time. This profile of how much fuel you use varies throughout the whole of the qualifying session, and particularly so in Monaco. At the beginning of Monaco, the track's all dirty, there's loads and loads of cars on the road, the opportunity to get blocked or yellow flags or to be on the track at the wrong time when the track's not in its best condition, those opportunities are legion earlier on. So at the beginning of qualifying, we had the car with loads of fuel in it and we ran the whole session, lap after lap after lap, just waiting for the opportunity to put in a nice solid lap time and get through to the later stages of qualifying. But as the track improves and as people drop out with the knockout format of qualifying, then things migrate from that risk management situation to one where you just want to get your best possible lap in with one go at it. The tyres, as the track progresses, the tyres become very, very clearly good for just one lap. If you know that, then you might as well only put one lap of fuel in the car, and the car is then quicker because it's not carrying the weight of the sort of insurance fuel that you've put in for a second flying lap. So by the time we got to Q3 and the track settled down, Lewis settled down, that was just the best way to get a good lap time out of the car. Put one fuel lap in there and go for it. And he did a nice lap with it. Why in the race was George asking to invert the cars? Well, this was really very much to do with the fact that George had incurred a 5-second penalty during that sort of mad scramble as the cars all got onto the intermediate tyres during the rain. And George had had a minor incident for which he was penalised by 5 seconds. At the time, in the immediate aftermath of that, his most immediate pursuer was Leclerc. And there were some laps in which Leclerc was starting to look threatening, like he could close up within that 5-second gap and therefore take points off the team. And this was George's request. If we had swapped the cars over, then Lewis maintained a buffer between George and the pursuing Leclerc, then it would have increased the chances that Leclerc could not have got within the 5 seconds necessary for him to overhaul George once the penalty was applied. This was very much a hypothetical request from George. I think he knew when he asked that this was going to be a very difficult thing to execute. And in any case, it was rendered moot pretty rapidly because it was pretty obvious that George had the pace to put gap between him and Leclerc in any case. So within a lap or two of that request being made, it was fairly clear that there was no meaningful threat from behind, and we proceeded in the normal order to the flag. Can the teams learn much about a car when they're being hauled up high in the sky by the Monaco cranes and everyone can peer up and take a look at the parts of the car that we don't normally see? Well, certainly it always attracts a lot of interest. There's a lot of scurrying around with team cameramen, not just to rely on the TV pictures, which are low resolution and not good enough grade. Photographers are positioned at strategic parts of the track where there's a likelihood that the cranes will be brought into play, and they're there clicking away furiously, and then our inboxes subsequently fill with the high-res images of other cars. Sadly, our own car had its trip into the heavens this weekend, and there'll be plenty of photos in our competitors' inboxes from that. But yes, we got a nice clutch of Red Bull imagery, and that's always a good thing for our aerodynamicists to pore over and see if we can pick out details that will be of interest to us in our ongoing test program. Did the rain, and indeed the intensity of the rain, catch everyone by surprise, or was it anticipated? The answer to that is yes and no. We all the teams, knew that rain was a real possibility. In fact, most of us had concluded that rain was going to come during the race, but exactly when and how hard, those were very much open questions. And when it eventually did come, it did actually come very quickly. So we were expecting it maybe another 10 or 15 minutes from when it arrived, but the bubbling up of the little local storm cell, that happened really in the blink of an eye. But what made it particularly tricky was not its sort of sudden arrival, but the manner in which it propagated afterwards, because there were several laps where it really was very wet in one part of the circuit, but bone dry in the other. And there was a lot of discussion with the drivers about whether they should come in for new rubber, and their opinion was yo-yoing around. Every time they were on the wet bit of the track, it was, I've definitely got to come in, I've definitely got to come in. And when they hit the dry part of the track, it was, no, this is way too dry. And the whole debate was, is it going to get worse? Or is this the worst, have we already seen the worst of it? Because if we'd already seen the worst of it, it was better to fight on with dry tyres. If not, then definitely right thing to do to come in and change tyres. And us, I think, getting the timing about right, coming in at pretty much the best moment where it had become clear that it was no longer sustainable to drive round on half wet, half dry, on dry tyres, and we ducked in the pits at pretty much the optimal moment. Our grid positions at the end of the race really improved as a result of that well-timed decision by the team and really brilliantly executed driving by our two drivers. What are our plans for the race weekends to come? Are there going to be more upgrades, or will we just sort of consolidate and settle back to see what the Monaco upgrade brought us before we make our decisions? Well, we certainly will settle back and look at what the Monaco upgrade package has brought us at a more normal track. But we will also push on in parallel with a whole bunch more things. So there will be a little bit we're bringing to Barcelona and many more things in the races that follow. We can't afford just to do everything sequentially, although there's a sort of academic purity to that. It's just too slow a way of going ahead. So the upgrades will keep coming. Hopefully a decent package to build upon with what we put on the track in Monaco, and then we just step forward from here up to the summer break and beyond.